Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Mack. Welcome to the 19th event in the 2025-2026 iteration of the Popular Music Books in Process series, a collaboration between the Journal of Popular Music Studies, IASPM US, and the POP Conference. Thank you to my co-organizers, Eric Weisbard, Francesca Royster, Gus Stadler, Carl Wilson, Elena Raslagova, and Alex Vizi. On June 10th, our last event for this season, Will Kaufman will be here to discuss his forthcoming book, American Song and Struggle from World War II to MAGA, to be published by Cambridge University Press. He will be in conversation with Gus Stadler. Previous recorded sessions of the Popular Music Books in Process series are archived on Eric's YouTube channel. Today, we're very excited to have Gustavo Souza Marques and Mike Levine here to discuss, respectively, Tyler, the Creator's Hip Hop Revolution Beyond Gangsta, recently published by Bloomsbury, and an in-progress genealogy of Cuban Reparto and its intersections with bespoke media to be published by University Press of Florida. Gustavo Souza Marques, also known by his stage name of Gus Mayo, is an ethnomusicologist, hip-hop music producer, and assistant professor in the Department of Musicology at the University of Michigan. Dr. Marquez's main areas of expertise are hip-hop and popular music in the Americas. His debut book, Tyler, the Creator's Hip Hop Revolution Beyond Gangsta, explores Tyler's musical work as that of a game-changing future in hip-hop culture, merging ethnography and audiovisual analysis to unfold the complexities of his creative output. Mike Levine works as assistant professor of musicology at Christopher Newport University. He's written for Sounding Out, Cuban Literary and Arts magazine Hypermedia, Cuban Studies, 20th Century Music, American Music, and Independence in 21st Century Popular Music, Cases from Beyond Anglo-America. He is currently drafting a monograph, Pegajo, Underground Music and the Rise of Reparto in Post-Socialist Cuba for University Press of Florida. After the discussion, there'll be a Q&A, which Gus will moderate. Please put your questions and comments in the chat as they come to you, and Gus will find them there at the end of the discussion. Also, feel free to post comments throughout the conversation. So now I will turn things over to Gustavo and Mike.
Thank you very much for having us. I'm very excited to share not only my book, but to have a conversation with my colleague Mike Levine. I think it's going to be very productive. And Mike, do you want to say some words as well?
Oh, just the same. I've been really enjoying getting to know Gustavo throughout this process in thinking of ways our work is connected that I would not have thought of before we were kind of put together on this. And I'm just super excited to continue that conversation and, of course, invite everybody else to be a part of it too.
Great. So I have just a few slides. I guess we'll start with the first one, in which I will explain a little bit of each chapter of my book. And I'll share my window right now. Yes, so is everything all right? Everyone can see my slides, right? So basically, that's the name of my book, Tyler, the Creator's Hip Hop Revolution. I will start explaining the title of the book, why I'm saying that Tyler is causing this revolution in hip hop culture. And it's mainly because he has been defying stereotypes related to race, gender, and sexuality in hip hop. And most of those stereotypes have been connected to gangster related stereotypes that have been very strong in hip hop culture, at least since the late 80s. And that's why the subtitle of the book is Beyond Gangsta. And through my five chapters and also the conclusion of my book, I explore not only that history on how those stereotypes were formed in hip hop culture, but also why Tyler defied them, challenged them, and how he did that, especially through his musical videos and audiovisual material. By the way, in this book, I had the privilege to interview Luis Punch Perez, Tyler the Creator's director of photography. It was a very interesting experience because when I interviewed Luis, it was by email when I was only a PhD student in Ireland. And I decided to take the risk and send a message to him. and he was very kind and decided to answer my email, and we exchanged a couple of emails during that time, and that conversation is included in the book as well. And this is very relevant because this book was released to Bloomsbury's series New Approaches to Sound, Music, and Media. So the analysis of Tyler's audiovisual material is very important for the development of the book and the arguments that I carry out. So having the chance to talk with Luis was really fruitful for the development of this book. So I start explaining chapter one, which is oversaturation with gangster related stereotypes. And in the book, I decided to use this term gangster related because gangster rap is not that strong anymore as used to be in the late 80s and early 90s. But anyway, most of its stereotypes related to hyper masculinity in hip hop are still very pervasive in hip hop, in the mainstream of hip hop, in subgenres like trap music, drill. We still see those hyper masculine stereotypes being played in a very evident manner. And one thing that I discuss in my book is the intergenerational clash between Tyler and previous generations of rappers from Los Angeles, because Tyler is also from LA. And I discuss how Tyler grew up listening to artists like Outkast, Missy Elliott, MF Doom, Eminem, artists that weren't really connected to the idea of being a gangster or looking tough, to put in a simple manner. On chapter two, I continued that discussion from LA because I also carried out ethnography for the development of this book. I had a chance to meet Tyler in person. Actually, it was very random, it wasn't planned at all, but I decided to visit his shop at Fairfax Avenue in Hollywood, his golf shop, his clothing shop in Hollywood, and fans told me that he was always there, that I should take the chance to visit the shop, that maybe I could have the chance to meet him in person. And that actually happened. Was very random, but was very interesting because I was able to talk to him for a few seconds and tell him that I was developing this PhD research. I was just a PhD student during that time about his musical work. And on chapter two, I continue that ethnography, but in the virtual world, mainly because Tyler is a internet phenomenon. So I make a connection between um, his background in LA with everything that he did online to become relevant in the global hip hop scene. So I also carried out a virtual ethnography about his lyrics, interviews, his comedy sketches that he also developed throughout his career until I achieved my analysis of Yonkers, which is his groundbreaking music video that invests a lot in shock value narrative to bring attention to his musical work as a emerging artists during that time until I make a connection to other of his two music videos, Buffalo and Find the Wings. And by the way, in my book, I develop a theory that these three music videos, Yonkers, Buffalo, and Find the Wings, they can be read as a trilogy, even though Tyler never claimed it was a trilogy. But in the way I read the sequence of those three music videos, I believe it's possible to make a connection between them, and I'll talk more about it in a second. And after I develop that interpretation of these three music videos as a trilogy, because they discuss race, gender, and sexuality in a very complex and layered manner. These are the main topics of my book. I finish the book with the last chapter about Sorry Not Sorry, which is a very interesting music video because in that video, Tyler showed all the previous personas that he developed throughout his career, to continue that discussion on hip hop stereotypes that he's always reworking and re-articulating throughout his work. And before I continue, I have a question. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about your work before I continue?
Sure, we can do that before you get into the videos.
Yeah,
You're saying right, right, right. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I can give a broader thing and then we can take a deeper dive into that area. That sounds good. Okay.
let me start.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, no problem. Okay, cool. So I'll share and yeah, just like Gustavo did, I'll give you all a little bit of an idea of what I'm writing. Right off the bat, you'll notice that I don't have a cool like book cover like Gustavo does. So mine's still out for review, and I'm hoping to get those back by July. It would be great to get them back before the school year starts. But in any case, actually, before I move to there, I just want to quickly just mention this word pagao, which is a very common word in Latin American music writ broadly. It means, well, literally means stickiness, but it's usually connoted to mean a popular song. So I use it in a few different ways, but also because it's a word that's very commonly used by the artists in this musical style. I thought I'd make it the title itself. So this is my table of contents right here. Basically, my story moves chronologically from the initial development of this musical style, reparto music, into it becoming successful in these small, economically poor but culturally rich Afro-Cuban districts centered around Havana, becoming popular there, and then eventually becoming nationally popular by the end of the 2010s, which I talk about more around chapters 3 and 4, and then eventually chapter 5, how it got picked up by international labels and grew successful outside of Cuba in spaces like Lima, Peru, which is where it's just as popular these days as it is in Havana. So that's a little bit about how I've organized it right there. So both history of the genre, a kind of genealogy of the genre from around 2010 until today, and also how it expanded. Um, so just wanted to mention these Repartimiento districts as I said earlier, they're very economically rundown districts for a variety of reasons since at least the 1990s. And but they also have a very culturally rich background. A lot of big genres came out of these areas, like rumba in part came from this area. Timba music in the 90s, and then Cuban reggaeton came, a lot of the bigger artists came from these areas too. So it's no huge shocker that a new genre would take its place in the 2010s, reparto music, which borrows the clave rhythm that you'd find in rumba and you'd find in timba. Timba, for those who don't know, is basically Cuba's answer to salsa music. So it has the clave pattern that you'd find in this kind of music, that da 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 da, called the rumba 3/2 clave, combined with a bombo bass pattern, bum 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 bum, and that's where the music developed from. It just was a very catchy beat from the beginning of the 2010s on forward. So the artists come out of these areas. It's named for these areas, of course, right? Short term for repartimiento right there. And these are some of the biggest artists of the genre today. Chocolate MC, who purports to be the founder of the genre, wrote his first music around 2010. I should mention he was an acolyte, kind of student of this gentleman on the bottom left. His name is Elvis Manuel. They both came out of the same Departamiento district in Havana called Arroyo Naranjo. And Elvis Manuel was experimenting with reggaeton himself and was gaining a big local reputation and decided to go to Miami to further his career because at that point, Cuba, it's much the same today, hardly has any internet access. And also, the state censors a lot of material because all broadcast, terrestrial broadcasts in any case, are nationalized. And so, if you want to make it big, playing music the state doesn't like, you really kind of need to, at that point anyway, in 2008, before anyone had internet access down there, you had to leave. And so he went to Miami. Unfortunately, he died en route when he was just 18. He took a boat from port in Havana to get to Miami, and he died en route. And so this creates a kind of origin narrative and origin myth around the genre. And Chocolate MC claims to be carrying the torch, so to speak, for Luis Manuel and frames himself as the legacy of Elvis Manuel in what he invented, which again is matching those two beats together. He claims to have done that. And these are just some other big artists down here too, which we could discuss later, but just wanted to mention some of these: Wampi, Bebecito, and Payaso de Ley. So I can leave it right here before we get into talking more about the videos that we want to take a deeper dive into. But I want to mention this slide right here because this is a really important part of Reparto's story. As I mentioned, in 2008 and around 2010, television and radio were nationalized, and Cuba was very internet poor, as it is today, especially with all the blackouts happening in 2026. Even if anything, it's even more difficult today. And so what ended up happening was an alternative to the internet, a terrestrial network called El Paquete Semanal, which means the weekly package, was also growing at that time in 2008, 2010. It also started in Havana and slowly got bigger. What it is it's a system of USB sticks. So you'll have people download the latest music and media from hidden satellite dishes. Oh, a couple people will have those dishes hidden on the rooftops. They're very anonymous. I tried to reach them. I wasn't able to. And they'll take that data they download and copy it onto USB sticks of so-called paqueteros or deliverers of this content. Those paqueteros will go to different beats, so to speak, like a nationalized, analogous to a drug trade, but in this case, media. So they'll take their content, their USB sticks across the nation in different beats, these paqueteros, and I did talk to a bunch of these folks, and then service customers that will purchase every week the hot new, music and video games and sports games, software, antivirus software, anything you can imagine. And that's what I'm showing you right here is what it looks like when a consumer gets this information copied on their USB stick. So you have applications up here, for instance, mini series down here. Música Actualizada is new music, the latest music releases. And in the Nacional file, you'll find mostly Reparto music. So El Paquete Semanal serves a lot of different things, but the biggest domestic content, made in Cuba, the most popular form is Reparto music. So these two things basically grew up together. This system of internet delivery, offline human-powered internet delivery, El Paquete Semanal, grew up around the same time as this music, Reparto, and both kind of depended on one another to become successful and nationally known. So a big part of what I talk about is how this music grew popular and basically eventually made the state kind of irrelevant to becoming popular. A whole music industry developed on El Paquete Semanal. Here's just some pictures that I've taken of folks trading this money for this. I should mention, so it's new content every week, costs the equivalent of about $2 US. So keep in mind the Cubans make a salary of about $30 US monthly. So just to give you an idea of the cost there. So I won't take too much time here, but I just want to mention that as I said, the state became irrelevant as a cultural gatekeeper because of the success of this human-powered offline network, which I should mention is technically illegal, but the government allows it to work as long as people don't place anything too dissident on this network. The golden rule is no politics, no pornography. We could split that open a little bit later, and I can give you some specific examples of music that rides the line of what is considered pornographic or political, but that's kind of the idea. So Reparto plays with being controversial without being so controversial that cultural, state gatekeepers would actually disallow the material from being circulated. But an entire music business grew up over this network, over El Paquete Semanal. These matrices are the people that download the content on satellite dishes. And then so these people will work closely with promoters to get new music given to them. These are big Reparto promoters that are native to Havana, that are Cuban. Michel Boutique, Ernesto, a gentleman I managed to interview for a few years off and on in Havana, Abdela Esencia. These people give their music to submatrices who control a different sector of Cuba. and then to the paqueteros who will farm it out, the music to different beats across Cuba, and then feed it to the subscribers. So that's basically how it works. These are artists right here, like Kimiko Iordi, Cosa Mia. They will give their music to these folks. Either they'll pay the promoters to promote their music, or the promoters think they're so good that they'll take their music and promote it within El Paquete Semanal. So it's this whole alternative terrestrial human-powered music business that's native to Cuba alone, and allows the music to get out there. And these folks hope to recoup their investment for recording through live gigs, not too different than other, music, global music industries in that regard. But just want to give you an idea. I should mention just one last thing. The promoters are super powerful. If you download an MP3, you don't find the picture of an artist on your MP3. You find the picture of the promoters. So the promoters are really like very visible with their whole industry and how they direct the music. So anyway, there's just a basic idea of how that progresses. This takes me about the third chapter, and I'll pick it up further, once we discuss music videos and how the music eventually leapfrogged outside of Cuba and became more internationally successful. But yeah, please go ahead, Gustavo.
Thank you very, very much, Mike. So before I talk more about the music videos that we chose to discuss today, I think I need to provide more context on who Tyler is, because maybe not everyone is familiar with his musical work. So I will do that very briefly, okay? And let me go back to the slides again. So basically, Tyler right now, he's a very successful American rapper. He's a Grammy awarded rapper, but his beginnings was very different from what he became later, as we can see today. So basically, he started very young, at a very young age, not only as a rapper, but also as a music video director and hip hop music producer as well. So he used to do everything by himself with his original hip hop collective, Odd Future. There was a big wave of success for Odd Future in the late 2000s. It was a big hip hop collective that included many different artists, rappers, and beat makers. And one thing that really helped them, especially as an internet phenomenon, was the use of shock value, imagery, and narrative. And in that sense, I think there's a strong dialogue between my work and Mike's work as well, because he was just discussing how in Reparto they also try to those how much controversy they are putting into their music. And Odd Future also did that, even though in a very broad and upfront manner. But anyway, controversy was also a strategy in the case of Odd Future. And this is very interesting because my initial interest in their musical work came from their sonic and visual uniqueness. Because when I first became interested in their music, it was in 2012, 2013. I had my initial limited English, so I wasn't able to understand everything they were saying in their lyrics, so I wasn't paying enough attention. So at the beginning, all those shock value lyrics, replete of full of homophobia, misogyny, and other problems, it wasn't something that was coming into my radar. Only later I was able to realize that. But anyway, it's very interesting because since the beginning they sounded very different from many other rappers. Their music production was more experimental. Their music videos was very do it yourself and experimental as well. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't like hyper masculine as you generally see in mainstream hip hop. And the sounds and the imagery by themselves already caught my attention. And another thing that caught my attention as well is that many of the original Odd Future members, they are not active anymore. But anyway, back in the 2010s, many of the original members of Odd Future, they were skateboarders like Tyler the Creator himself. And I grew up skateboarding as well, and that created some sort of identification between myself and their musical work. And later, as I dive deeper into Tyler's musical work and Odd Future's musical work, and all the layered and very complex discussions on race, gender, and sexuality that they carry out in their musical work, to a certain extent, that worked for me as well as a light-skinned Afro-Brazilian to have some discussions and reflections regarding my own racial identity, which to a certain extent I bring that to my book as well. And when I realized how layered and complex the discussions on race, gender, and sexuality are in the musical work of Odd Future and Tyler the Creator, I end up thinking about post-colonial authors like Black American intellectual Du Bois in his book The Souls of Black Folk, especially regarding his concept of double consciousness that I will explore later in the next slides, but also Frantz Fanon, who also had a very similar concept with the idea of black skin, white masks, because both tropes related to blackness and tropes related to whiteness is well explored in the career of Tyler the Creator. And sometimes Tyler does that in a very serious manner. Sometimes he does that in a very comedic, like 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 as a comedy, and in a playful manner. But anyway, throughout his career, he's always playing between these two tropes of whiteness and blackness. And because of that, post-colonial studies became something very strong um, in my book. And regarding this aspect of humor that Tyler always invested since the beginning of his career, and also the element of self-loathing that was present since the beginning of his career, is very interesting, both aspects, because this is not so common in hip hop culture, especially if we are talking about mainstream hip hop, in which those hyper masculine stereotypes are very strong. And Tyler, through humor and self-loathing since the beginning, he was already challenging hyper-masculine narratives in his musical work. And something that's very interesting in his case, and very layered and very complex as well, is that his most bizarre and most outrageous lyrics, replete of homophobia and misogyny, was projected over his white alter ego Wolf Haley. And Tyler, when he was young, he said that Wolf Haley was that cool ass ginger dude, in the words of Tyler the Creator, that if he could choose, he would be. So the way Tyler was playful with his own racial identity throughout his alter egos is very interesting, very layered, and very complex. Of course, that today I won't be able to make justice to that discussion, but I think it's important to introduce how layered and complex the racial issues are in the musical work of Tyler the Creator. And this is very interesting because at the same time that Tyler wrote many confessional lyrics replete of humor and self-loathing, he was also writing these very problematic lyrics projected over his white alter ego, Wolf Haley. So the real Tyler was full of humor and self-loathing, and let's say the fake Tyler was carrying out those hyper masculine narratives throughout his white alter ego. And that's the main reason why I brought um, foundational scholars like Du Bois and Fanon to my book. And in terms of playfulness, especially regarding the use of humor and self-loathing at the beginning of Tyler's career, that anticipated his queer identity, because later in his album Flower Boy, Tyler opens up about his homosexual experiences, and most of those experiences are related to having relationships with white men. So once again, there is a racial element in his discourse. And once again, that's why I thought that bringing those very foundational post-colonial scholars would work well to discuss the musical work of Tyler, the Creator. So moving on, today we are planning to discuss some music videos that bring that racial element in a more evident manner, I need to make a connection between two chapters in my book, which is chapter 3, in which I analyze his groundbreaking music video Yonkers, a very interesting music video because, as Luis Pancha Perez said in my interview with him, Tyler likes to create dialogues with his artistic work, and it's easy to create like a through line between Yonkers, Buffalo, and Find the Wings. And one of the main reasons why Yonkers became Tyler's great groundbreaking video to success, it's mainly because it's a very unique video. First of all, Tyler is performing by himself. He's not with his crew, his peers, or anything like that, as would be common in mainstream hip hop videos. He's all by himself in a white studio backdrop, performing for the camera, and he eats a cockroach, he throws up, at the end, he commits fictional suicide. All this type of imagery is not common in hip hop at all. And even Luis Panch Perez, when I interviewed him for the book, he felt that that music video was God sent. In his words, this is Luis Perez's words. He felt that it was God sent because it was just different from everything else he had done before. And just to make sure, Luis Pancha Perez, he's very familiar with hip hop because he worked with Hype Williams before working with Tyler, the Creator. So he worked with like artists like Busta Rhymes and many other artists that Hype Williams worked with. So he wasn't unfamiliar with hip hop. But anyway, when he met Tyler and the idea for Yonkers, he was really impressed with the originality of Tyler's musical work. And regarding the connection between Yonkers, Buffalo, and Find the Wings is mainly because Yonkers opens with Tyler as the thinker stereo, which is very interesting because portrays Tyler as this very psychologizing rapper, very reflexive rapper that at the end, after reflecting so much about his own issues and conflicts, commits a fictional suicide by hanging at the end of Yonkers. And of course, that in the book, I make a connection with the fictional hanging not only to Tyler's suicidal ideations that appears a lot in his early musical work, but also to racial hatred in the US. And this is not by chance because Buffalo opens with Tyler being hanged in a tree and then chased by a spectral black lynching mob. So there's once again this idea of playing with tropes of not only playing with tropes of whiteness and blackness, but also subverting them, as Tyler used to do with his white alter ego Wolf Haley that I was explaining earlier. And at the end of the music video of Buffalo, there is a change to Find Your Wings. So in hip hop music videos, this is somewhat common. Sometimes rappers releases two music video as one piece, and that's what happened between Buffalo and Find the Wings. And Find the Wings is very interesting because it has a lot of humor and parody. But anyway, even that lighter aspect related to humor and parody, there is also like racial elements and issues being worked there. Because in that parody, he's somewhat not making fun, but he's parodying the iconic TV show Soul Train, which was a very important achievement for Black Americans, especially right after the civil rights movement. And Tyler chooses to parody that show in his Find Your Wings music video. And not by chance, Roy Ayers, that performed in Tyler's song Find Your Wings as a featured artist, he also performed in Soul Train. So actually the music video of Find Your Wings is a parody of Roy Ayers' performance in that show. I have some images here that I brought for us. This is how the music video of Buffalo starts. And of course, that was a super controversial music video. And it seems that Tyler himself decided to remove the music video later from his own channel, which is somewhat surprising because throughout his career, Tyler tended to be very unapologetic regarding the things he does. But anyway, he never spoke about why that music video is not available anymore in his YouTube channel. So it seems that he decided to remove it. But anyway, you know how the internet is. It's very easy to find the video this day on YouTube as well. But anyway, this is how the video starts. It already starts in a very striking manner, as you can see by this image I am pointing out here. And then the frame opens up and shows Tyler's being hanged from a tree, and his body is all white. So he's doing white face, but also his body is all white. And the lynching mob chasing him is actually made of Black Americans. However, there is something very interesting that I discuss in the book, and I also said in the previous slide, like this lynching mob following him doesn't look real. They have an aspect of looking like ghosts or maybe a projection from Tyler's mind. And this is very striking and very revealing because in the middle of the video, when Tyler stops to pretend that he will smoke a cigarette, like he just pretend that he's going to light it up, he ends up not lighting it up. And I have some comments about that in the book as well, because I think he's playing with the idea of being cool, you know, and smoking cigarettes like in the history of cinema and of movies and music videos. The act of smoking is generally considered cool, and Tara is kind of making fun of that idea with that scene as well. But anyway, something that I argue in the book as well is that if Tyler is stopping to smoke a cigarette while he's being chased by that mob, it means that that mob actually can't hurt him. This is one of the evidence that is more just like a projection of his mind, and of course, part of his survival guilty as a very successful Black American artist. So, and by the way, this chapter it was the most complex and challenging for me because it's too much things to cover and too much things to consider in my racial discussion about his music. And as the music video goes on, he reaches a place in which his former um, mob chasing him become his fans, looking forward to hear what he has to say. And in that scene, he cleans up, he vanishes the white paint from his face, revealing a fake blackness underneath that. So there is not only a play with white face, but also he's playing with black face because this black right here in his skin, of course, is not his real skin. So once again, there is this play with tropes related to whiteness and blackness in these music videos. And when the music video for Buffalo ends, Tyler ends that music video with the verse, "How many liters in the house?" So another thing that I discuss in this chapter is how Tyler is questioning Black leadership in the US in contemporary times as a very successful hip hop artist. And before I give the stage to Mike, I just want to show how Tyler made this parody of Roy Ayers in the TV show Soul Train, because Fight the Wings counterbalances all the grave aspects of Buffalo with a very humorous performance. As you can see here, Tyler is very playful, very fun in that music video, the complete opposite of Buffalo. And the set and the clothing, everything, even the way Tyler is dressed with this blue sweater is very similar to Roy Ayers. And even in the music video, he mentions like that Roy Ayers wasn't able to participate, but he's very important for Tyler anyway. So even though this music video is very funny, there's still like racial elements to be considered because Tyler is parodying a very iconic Black American TV show as Soul Train. Okay, the floor is yours, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gustavo. That's like endlessly interesting. I just loved reading it, honestly, in your chapters on those three videos. So, I also want to like perhaps put that in a conversation with a video or two videos that were released in 2017. Let me just share this. This was this video for Tango Money. I should mention that my interest in this project at all is because I'm like a lot of people from my generation, maybe like a disillusioned techno optimist. I grew up like a digital migrant, like a lot of, again, like a lot of folks in my generation, and just loved the early internet and what it promised. I made ringtones for a living for 6 years, but that shop was bought out by a big conglomerate, and like I said, it was, with the growth of social media, fairly disillusioning. And when I went down to Cuba for a different reason, just to link up with a band whose members I had known and found out about Uppercut Seminole. I found it so just amazing what they were able to build themselves. Anyway, I found it in this music, but this moment around 2017 is when Cubans began to gain access to 3G, which became fully accessible in 2018. By 2017, they were already installing a lot of that. The first cell towers went up, for instance. Even though, like I said, even today, it's pretty spotty. But this music had grown popular enough by that point too to attract the interest of foreign labels. And so I had become friends with a Reparto promoter. His name was Tony Hernandez, and he told me that he had created a music video for a local artist who was fairly popular. His name was Wieldy. He had a long history himself. He played in a Reparto group called Ireoma in the early 2010s. By 2017, struck out on his own. He released this single, Tango Money, in the hopes of making it big. I'm not going to play this song, but you can find at least one of the videos I'm going to show you on YouTube pretty easily. And the idea was to make a crossover hit. The chorus contains the melody from Barbie Girl. That's Barbie Girl. I think that's the name of the song from Aqua. And the title itself is bilingual. So Tony Hernandez produced the first video, and the idea was that Wieldy was heartbroken. It was filmed on a very low budget, just on his couch in a living room, heartbroken. He just gotten dumped by his true love, and so he's singing away his pain while smoking and drinking. Anyway, a couple months later, Wieldy was quote unquote discovered by the owner of Italian label Planet Records, who had developed a keen interest in Reparto. His name is Roberto Ferrante, the owner of this label, and he redid the video with a big director of reggaeton called Freddie Loons. And I want to show you just some screenshots briefly to see these two videos just in slides back to back. So this is the original on the left right here, directed by Tony Hernandez. And in here you can see Wieldy singing his heart out. He's having some emotional troubles right here. So the song wasn't changed at all between these two versions, but the emphasis was entirely so. In the one on the right, the video produced from Freddie Loons, Wieldy is robbing a bank and meeting scantily clad women along the way. So he's portrayed in a very different manner. Here's another screenshots back to back. So on the left, you see them drinking a bottle of Havana Club, a very accessible drink in Cuba. And on the right, you see Wieldy as very successful. Now that he's stolen the money, he gambles it and is with those women forming, bricks, stacks and stacks and stacks of cash right here. So all this is to say the big facelift, so to speak, that Reparto went into as the genre was repackaged for international consumption, the kind of artist next door look that was associated with Reparto for the first, like I said, it came on the scene around 2010, so over the first 6-7 years of the genre's life. It discussed topics mostly connected to local neighborhoods. How late buses were, for instance, was a topic that came up in a lot of different songs. some very quotidian kind of things, right? And that changed as it began to be noticed by these international labels. The self-fashioning of artists changed, and more money was spent on these videos as well. So on YouTube today, I should mention this too. The video on the left here, this was circulated throughout Paquete Seminole, but Roberto Ferrantes, when he signed Wieldy, he removed or did his best to get rid of these old versions of the video. And this is the one on the right, Tango Money, that you'll find if you look for this on YouTube. You won't find this one. I mean, I have it unlisted, but you won't officially find the one on the left. But the one on the right, you will. So again, this is for Planet Records. And portrays a very different version of the artist, much more in line with like reggaeton, international reggaeton, in the way that a lot of those stars are self-fashioned as well. And of course, this gets into all um, uh, race-based ideas of what it means to be successful, young, and black, not only from Cuba, but the ways that he's making money. He's seen as this successful criminal, right? He robs a bank. That's the idea in the video. That's how he's making his money, and that makes him more attractive, right? So he successfully navigated late capitalism, so to speak. But in any case, yeah, so I wanted to give you an idea of what happened to the music as it grew, and it's still growing today, for sure. But I think this juxtaposes, and this is how I discussed it in chapter 4, in any case, this kind of moment when the music began to be noticed internationally, and how artists dealt with that, and what ended up happening to the music, to the scene, and to the circulation of the work as internet access became more accessible as well. So yeah, it's just a little bit about that, and that's mostly where I end the book as well. I talk a little bit about international scenes, like I mentioned Lima, Peru, where the only international Reparto festival uh, that happens annually is still taking place. It's incredibly popular over there, but that's the gist of it right there. So yeah, I hope that gives you all an idea of where that's at.
So, Mike, there's something that I'd like to discuss about the connection between our works, especially regarding the way, like the original version of Tango Money and the
Hmm.
and what it became later, because I think it's very related to many things I discuss about Tyler and the way he defines like gangster stereotypes and hyper masculine stereotypes,
Hmm.
especially with his more vulnerable lyrics and songs in which he tries to push away this idea that black men in the music industry they need to portray themselves as very hard and hyper masculine. So it's very interesting what happened to Tango Money later. This is my first question. Do you have any comments on that? Because I have a second one as well that could be related as well.
Yeah, this is something I'm really interested in your work too. Like hip hop, of course, is a much older style than Reparto. And I wonder like, and I know this really isn't answer your question, but it kind of like this is where it brings me to is like it's fascinating like the point that it's gotten to where an artist like Tyler has so many layers and uh much complicated stuff to push back. I've seen those videos before I read your book. After I read your book, I was like, oh, that's what's going on. You're like, there's so much uh to talk about. And I feel like Reparto is on its way to developing these idiosyncrasies. And a few artists, I showed one earlier, Wampy, is doing some of that work. It's kind of self-critical, but also pacing it into a political context within Cuba. But I also feel like Tyler and the world making that he does, right? And also the way he's commenting on things is just like really bold. I feel like with Reparto, there's room for a lot of these shifts in self-fashioning, but I feel like I don't get the kind of alternative routes, for lack of a better word, that you find with Tyler. At least not yet. I mean, I do hope it gets there someday. Like your subtitle is talking about being post gangsta. Like I feel like these artists in many ways are mimicking a lot of the like gangsta feel, like Jay-Z's lines, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. Like that kind of ideal, which ironically in Cuba you don't really find in hip hop. Most hip hop in Cuba is very like quote unquote conscious. It's much more um like for lack of a better word, like intellectual and concerned with politics and identity. But in reggaeton, you find a lot of like material aspects being heightened, like ideas of mobility, like attraction, like women love you, you're making tons of money. And that I feel really carries over to Reparto. Like you find that kind of self-fashioning happening quite a bit. I feel like it's shifting somewhat, but not, but Tyler, I feel, and this is my question, my volley back to you, so to speak, is like, do you feel like that Tyler is like representing a new like era, so to speak, or do you feel he's like just out there, like you know what I mean, doing his own thing, or maybe both? I'm just curious, and forgive me if I didn't really answer your question, but you got me thinking. I appreciate that.
No, no, that's very good. So yeah, no, I believe Tyler, I'm not saying that him by himself did everything. Of course, that other artists were part of that revolution that I'm discussing in my book, that hip hop revolution. But Tyler, yes, he represents pretty well this new era of hip hop that we are
Hmm.
experiencing right now, with more openness regarding racial representation and expressions of gender and sexuality as well. And I think his earlier work with those very vulnerable and psychologizing lyrics collaborated to that a lot, and because it goes totally against the idea that men, especially black men, because of historical reasons and because of systemic issues as well, used to portray themselves in mainstream hip hop, at least through these very hyper masculine figures. And the way Tyler was able to be very, very open and very vulnerable and very emotional was a big disruption of those stereotypes since the beginning, even though he was carrying out those very homophobic and misogynistic lyrics through his white alter ego, Wolf Haley. So I'll be very honest, I think Tyler is too layered to be covered in this event today, and I really hope I made justice to my discussion on the book. It's very difficult to sum up everything, but I hope it's fine. But yeah, and that's why I was trying to make a connection because between those two versions of Tango Money, like the old one and the new one, because the old one is like more vulnerable, more open, more emotional, and I think that um, emotional aspect, it's not only related like to reparto, but also older traditions in Latin American music,
Hmm.
like bolero, for instance. In bolero, you also have a lot of openness and vulnerability from men, you know. But bolero always allowed men, let's say, to be a little bit corny or anything like that, and it's totally okay, you know. So I think there's a connection with that as well. And when Tango Money becomes more successful commercially, it incorporates these American hip hop stereotypes,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And this is my second question for you. I'm giving you back the question. Because in my book, I discuss like double consciousness a lot, right? Through the
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
boys and through Fanon as well. And I think double consciousness is happening in your work as well. Do you have any comments on that?
I just that's a really good question. I just want to back up for a second and just like mention or nuance like what you just said is such an important point about the Latin American context. Like I feel like Tango Money also needs to be thought of in the Cuban context because like you said, boleros, soul music, even timba, hip hop as well in Cuba, like there's a long history of being self-reflective and messing with gender roles, maybe not so much. That's something else we could talk about, but definitely being self-reflective, unrequited love, those kinds of like very personal issues. Like doing the thing that the video produced by Freddie Loons produced of being engaged with capitalism, that's super new in Cuba. You know what I mean? Like, so if anything, that's like kind of portraying something very different and unexpected. Whereas in the US, I feel like that's very played in a sense. You know what I mean? And like kind of almost like stereotypical of like counting stacks of cash. You know, it's something that's like a cliche, right? In a sense, to portray yourself like that. So I just want to make that, make that nuance right there too. But yes, your second question about double consciousness. Yeah, this is a really good point. This is a really nuanced point that also like is portray like gets us to differences in the way race is cast between these countries. Like, and I'd love to hear from your uh perspective and what you found looking at Tyler. But Fidel Castro made this comment years ago about how Cuba's not Latin American, they're Latin African. And I think it's an interesting point that like most Cubans that I meet, no matter their skin color, will consider themselves partially African, right? And then they'll use the term black, negro. They'll use these terms in their self-descriptions, right? And certainly racism exists, like for sure, 100%. It's more based on color than it is heritage. So they find a way to kind of divide between those things. And this is similar in a lot of Latin American areas, like ideas of racial harmony, right? And the kind of issues of blanqueamiento, right? Those kinds of concerns. So I feel like these Reparto artists will always mention articles of faith like that go back to Yoruba. So Regla de Ocho, or we might know it as Santeria up here, right? So those articles, like a lot of these people will dress in all white, for instance, which is the color of new initiates of Santeria. They'll wear beads of their orisha to connote which god they're faithful to. So all this is to say that these articles that are heavily associated with a Afro-Cuban identity will be part of what they're doing. And then on top of that, as I was saying in Tango Money, right, they use these material ideas that are more familiar to US hip hop and those kinds of ascendancy narratives, right? Of those kinds of uh, um, stories as well. Um, but at the same time, they'll view themselves as Latin American. And part of that, so right, so again, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, because it's double conscious, like I want to be careful, in applying that in the Cuban case, right? But there's definitely different pressures. I think that's a fair way to put it for these artists to portray themselves as legible, both to Cubans and the way that they're portraying themselves in terms of like being initiates of a faith, having an identity that is associated um, with Afro-Cuban elements, right? But also being legible to a marketplace that's global, that asserts a kind of idea of what it means to be Black and diasporic, right? So, but I'm curious, how this comes up in your thinking as well.
Yeah, it's mainly because the title itself is very interesting, and I think the title is already some sort of double consciousness, like tengo money,
Hmm.
like I have dinero, so tengo money, like bilingual, and they're also
Right,
capitalizing on a Barbie song, right? Which is very
right.
Yuppie,
Yes.
like not related to Cuban stereotypes at all. And at the same time, all these like American references are being juxtaposed with Cuban music, you know? So I think not only the title, but like the music production, and maybe I'm not a specialist in reparto, but like maybe even like the music production and what the artists are trying to convey is this very interesting combination between like a global north perspective and a global south perspective all at the same time, you know. And also in the second version of the music video, which from my perspective looks more American,
Hmm.
the guy is with a blonde woman, and I don't know if
Right.
that a reference to Barbie as well, you know.
I
So
didn't think of
like,
that. That's a good point. That's a
so
very good
like
point.
in terms of iconography, it's very interesting, you know. Like if you take each detail and try to explore how these two different perspectives are being put it, sorry, together, you know.
Yeah, this friction, this contradiction is super important. Like the whole book's name, Pagao. Like I kind of think about that. Like Pagao means stickiness. So, like a connection to your neighborhood, a connection to your community, and how you relate to them musically, right? But also Pagao is like being successful. It's like it allows you mobility to get out of Cuba, which is like they have 22-hour-a-day blackouts right now. So if you can afford to get out, most people do, understandably. But it's like that's a contradiction, right? Like where and most reparto music today in 2026 isn't even made in Cuba anymore because of these logistical challenges. But like what does that mean in terms of authenticity and credibility and and that speaks to your larger questions as well, of course, of like what um self-fashioning, right? And the kinds of identities they're navigating, right? As the music moves outwards, but still identifying yourself as from these neighborhoods is still super important to these artists. Like it is in hip hop, right? Identifying yourself as from originally, you know what I mean? Like from these areas. Yeah.
Okay, we
Yeah,
should
and
oh,
sorry.
I just want to make sure we do have one question so far. I just want to make sure as we're kind of moving towards the end of our um time that there's time for it to be asked and responded to. So yeah, Paxton, do you want to go ahead and ask it?
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt the great conversation. But I was just curious the idea of the promoter being the like visible avatar was so interesting to me. And I was just curious to know like the connections between like live music and nightlife and how and why it was influenced or in conversation with the kind of informal distribution system that you were talking about, like how the scene or the underground is forming in conversation with this technology.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Paxton. I love your hat too, by the way. Um, yeah, like I was mentioning, these promoters have a lot of power local, or did. Like nowadays, in the 2020s, it's like much more powerful. These foreign interlocutors that are interlopers, I should say, that have kind of taken over a lot of the local scenes. But in the 2010s, these promoters would be much more visible. They'd set up the shows. They would decide which music is promoted inside the Paquete on a given week, which music's repeated in the following week. So they're really like tastemakers, so to speak, and really kind of become like folk heroes in many ways to a lot of folks that like really look up to these figures. Of course, other people really hate these people because they feel like they're denying other artists a chance, at success. Um, but I would say in terms of this pipeline, on a technical level, I think it's super interesting because it's all powered in a literal sense by a USB stick, right? So you'd have the music show up on a USB stick. The club owners will also get up at the same and all every week. They'll plug it into their HDMI, inserts or the insert on their HDMI units on their television screens inside their clubs. And so they'll pipe in music from El Paquete Seminole every week. So quite a literal, and on the music videos, you'll see the promoter's name come up and their tag being called out, at the beginning and end of the videos. And then the performers will show up, and record and excuse me, perform in these dates. And there's a lot of pressure on them because they're oftentimes paying the promoters to do that work, to circulate their music. So the only way that they're going to recoup is through these live dates. Something else, maybe just a little off topic, but this will just take 30 seconds, is that when they record their music, by the way, I didn't mention this before, but they're recording their music through software that they're also getting from El Paquete Seminole. So Fruity Loops, Cubase, they're downloading cracked versions off that. They're making their beats through these software. They're recording them. And then once they play live, they play with actual drummers, like real human drummers that are usually like phenomenal, just unbelievable drummers. So I find it fascinating that like the music starts as a digital like representation of something real, like a live drummer, but they don't have live drummers in their studios because their studios are set up in their like one bedroom apartments. And then they're doing that, but then when they play live, they have the live drummers perform. So they have to pay them too, but that's like an audience expectation is that they're gonna have those live elements, during their live performances. So, but yeah, I hope that gives you an idea. But yeah, these promoters really used to run the show. And like I said, there was love projected to them, there was hate projected to them. But now that foreign labels like Planet Records have really like knocked down the door, it's changed the whole like pipeline like enormously in the past few years. But yeah, thank you for that, Paxton. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Um, are there other questions? Carl, do you want to ask a version of, you said there was something that you were going to ask about?
Yeah, I guess just relating to that last part, I was going to ask about the effect that the current crisis in Cuba is having on it, and then you started to allude to it. But relating to what Paxton was saying and what you were just saying, if a lot of the artists are now diasporic and have left, as you know, so many young people have, what effect is that having on how the music is developing, what networks it circulates in, all of those things?
Yeah, thank you for that, Carl. That's a really great question. Yeah, so a lot of the music, like a lot of the artists, excuse me, have left Cuba. As I mentioned, it's somewhat popular in Miami, less than I would think because that's a huge Cuban enclave, but super popular in Lima. So a lot of the artists are now living in Lima and experimenting with the styles that are popular there. A lot of popular music like guano ends up being glossed, or cumbia ends up happening and inserting its rhythms, juxtaposing that alongside. So that, gives them sort of legibility, excuse me, in Lima and then in Havana, and they hope elsewhere. So it's created this interesting global pipeline that extends from Havana to these other locations. Um, my last chapter is called Reparto en las Venas, which is from a Instagram post from an artist named Wampi who doesn't live in Havana anymore. And the idea is that Reparto is in his veins, right? It's something in his DNA, in his bloodstream. So this is his way of kind of essentializing a Reparto identity, saying like, I know I don't live there anymore, but not everyone can just make this music. Like in Peru, there's Peruvians that are making this music, and there's all these fights about whether they belong, right? Whether they're actually making true, big scare quotes there, reparto music, right? Whether they belong in the scene or not. There's all sorts of turf wars called tiraderas about that kind of fact. So it's loosened a lot of the more like a lot of the like there, it's become a lot more experimental, the sounds, to the point where I feel like the identity of Reparto and some of these artists that live overseas is more the fact that they can claim that they're from these neighborhoods and less by the sound itself of the music. So yeah, I found that really interesting moment in how it's developing. Yeah, like you said, it has a lot to do with the fact that like it's almost impossible to even make this music in Cuba anymore unless you have a private generator, and the only ones who have those are the foreign labels. So you're kind of beholden to their rules if you're making it from Havana, right? So this is just to kind of illuminate without taking up too much space, the kind of frictions that they're dealing with here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Elena, you want to?
Hi, thank you so much for your talks. I was just in response to this description of live drummers at the events in Cuba, but also now I understand that a lot of the musicians are actually not in Cuba. So some of my questions, like, let me rephrase my question to ask about what kind of audiences there are, like live audiences for these performers. I guess both in Cuba and in Lima, like what is the gender and like
Mhm.
race composition? And then I guess before when they were performing, when it was an expectation would be that the artist who created this music would then perform it live, is what is the main artwork? So do people
Mm,
think I'm getting this stick and it's cool, but really the real thing is when I hear it with a live drummer in the audience, or they're thinking this is real, and then there's like a
right.
cover. The live drum is just a cover of the real thing that I get electronically.
Oh my God, Elena, I love these like ontological questions. Like this is awesome. Like what is the actual product? Like I totally hear you. Yeah, like so this just to like not take up too much space, I want to connect this to something that I've unfairly neglected, which is dance. Like dancing is so important to this genre. It's that's one of the big things that separates it from reggaeton. Reggaeton, of course, is the perreo couples front to back dancing. This is group dancing, social dancing, which is like not that common anymore in Cuban music, but it's really made a comeback with Reparto. And so a live drummer really cuts through club, right? It's like super loud. And a lot of these drummers attend conservatories. They're quite good. And so they'll do both an impression, they'll do what the drumming did in the digital version, but they'll interpolate and embellish quite a bit too, so that there's a lot more going on because that's what Havana audiences want to hear. And so they kind of flirt with the timba tradition that I mentioned earlier that Reparto takes a lot from. These live drummers usually are trained playing timba music, which again is like a Cuban salsa version. And so in a live setting, they'll play like timba because that's considered like the du jour live kind of, it really shows off your virtuosity if you can play that kind of stuff. Much more than just piping in, canned music would. But just to answer you more directly, the quote unquote real version, so to speak, would definitely be the digital version. Because I still think the live performance is super important, but most people are hearing the music as a recording. Like in general, most people are hearing it, whether they're on the seawall in El Malecón, just hanging out, right? Or they're at a bar drinking, they're hearing that piped version. So I think in terms of like the quote unquote real version, I think that would definitely be it. But yeah, there's this whole friction between like what kind of drumming is really reparto drumming. Like, is it just a cheap version of timba, which I've heard from many critics, or is it its own thing that needs its own drumming tradition? That's something that's still developing, I would say. Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Changing registers and the presenter, Gustavo. I'm speaking about the Buffalo video, not having seen it, but it was just those images were so striking, and the fact that it's like it was a black mob, right? That's lynching a person in white, right? Yeah. And so I just wanted to invite you to maybe say more about the specific use of white and black face together, and I don't know if Fanon is the most helpful, or I'd be curious whether Fanon is the most helpful thing for your understanding of that, or just how you have developed your reading of that that image.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. So for that chapter, I work with Du Bois, and then I bring Fanon again because Fanon I bring earlier in my argument, and there is a reason for that. Like Fanon is not only an intellectual, psychiatrist, and activist, a black activist, intellectual, and psychiatrist, but he's also a scholar from the global south. So many things that he's discussing, to a certain extent, I can understand from my personal perspective. And that's why I decided to bring Fanon to the discussion as well, because it was easier for me as someone that wasn't born in the US, and especially as a mixed person that grew up a little bit confused in which, let's say, side I was located, if I was considered white or brown or whatever. This is something that was always in the back of my mind as I grew up in Brazil as one of the blackest countries outside Africa, you know. But for this chapter specifically, I bring Du Bois, and thanks for the opportunity to explain that better. There are many things to be considered regarding the way he's playing with white face and black face, and I bring that to my book as well, because this character right here, this, let's say, white guy here, this white character that Tyler is performing in this video, that same character also appears in Tamale, another music video from Wolf, a previous album, and also appears in another music video that I'm not remembering right now. But anyway, Buffalo is not the first time that this white character appears. And something that I discuss in my book is that he looks somewhat like a bald Nazi character, right? And I say that because Tyler was planning to release his first movie when he was younger, like mid-career. He said that he would leave behind the rap music industry just because he was so frustrated with all the stereotypes related to hip hop. And since the beginning, he was very frustrated about it. And that in the future, he would prefer to be reminded as a filmmaker instead of a rapper. And during that time, he was planning to release his first movie called Wolf, and he released only the trailer. To this day, he never released the movie, but the trailer is still available on YouTube. And in that trailer, this white character appears. And the white character in that trailer, he's very aggressive, he's very oppressive as well. And I make a connection between like this bald head character and Tyler making reference to Nazi, to a Nazi persona in his musical work. And I make that claim not by chance. There are other evidences of that. For instance, in the same frame here, Tyler is subverting a Nazi symbol with the pride colors. And of course, when he did that, it was another controversial moment in his career. And the way he justified that, he said that it was his way to provoke racists and Nazis, and he was using like the Nazi symbol to promote like pride, the colors of pride in this t-shirt. So his use of whiteface, there is a interconnection with Nazi ideas as well. And his use of blackface is very interesting because it's not only related to this very obvious frame right here, okay, and also his discussions on black leadership, because at the beginning of his career and during his mid-career as well, and this happened during his mid-career, Tyler was used to be seen as a very childish and immature rapper. And in this music video, he's making a provocation on that because he says that people use it to see him as very childish and immature just because he didn't adopted the stereotypes related to blackness in the rap music industry. And because of that, he was being misinterpreted as a challenging rapper. But anyway, his play of blackface, the way he plays with blackface, is not only related to this scene, and I discussed that in my book as well, because the way he's portraying this very meek, very kind, very generous black character in Fight the Wings could be read as blackface as well. Mainly because Tyler, like when he's being the, let's say, the real Tyler in interviews and public appearances, he's not that meek, not that kind. Generally, he's very provocative, very upfront about the things he believes and he thinks. And in this music video right here, Find the Wings, he's portraying the opposite of his public persona. And I read that as a way of make reference to blackface as well. And that's why Du Bois is very important in that chapter with his concept of double consciousness. And of course, I work with more contemporary scholars like Miles White with his book from, sorry, I forgot the name. I think the name is from Jim Crow to Jay-Z, sorry. That book From Jim Crow to Jay-Z is an important book that I use in my discussion as well. And this video, Fight the Wings, to a certain extent, could be read as blackface as well.
Thank you. So that does it for us. Thank you both so much. It was really great hearing you both from both of you and from your hearing your conversation with one another. So please join us again in 2 weeks. We have a session with Will Kaufman talking about his history of social protest in American music in conversation with me.